I think we're still on the country of the Arundel.
Absolutely.
Local shout if that's wrong. Acknowledge their custodianship of this country, past, present and future, and that sovereignty over this ground was never ceded. And in a way, in a kind of a microcosm, the permission for the establishment a couple hundred metres or a kilometre and a half or two back over this ridge was never really ceded either to the traditional owners or to the settlers who came so much later. In fact, when it was set up in 1970, local people were told that it was a weather station. It was a place that was actually built on a lie. So I'm really proud to be here with Lee and Janet and our state and territory colleagues and all of you. This is an important place, and it's important that we come here and that we remember exactly what it is that goes on behind this barbed wire. It's by pure coincidence. There's a huge site behind us. The really intense barbed wire fence goes for maybe a kilometre in either direction, and then it's a cattle fence. Not encouraging anything at all, just wanted to say this is kind of for show, but there are penalties of 7 years in prison for coming onto this site, taking photographs of the installation, and there are a couple of people, kindred spirits, who are actually up for prosecution under I forget exactly which act it is, but it's the one that's on one of those weird signs on the way in, for not doing any damage obviously, but for making their way onto these premises last year, and we've got to make sure that they are basically treated, that intervention, that non-violent direct action is treated with the respect that it deserves, and that they don't end up doing time in prison. First time I came here was 2002. It was in the run-up to the Iraq War. There was a big mobilisation. Lee's going to speak in a minute about the very long history of demonstrations, civil disobedience and dissent that this place attracts, and that it has attracted since the very first day they switched it on. 2002, we were here because it seemed reasonably obvious that despite enormous global civil society mobilisation, that George Bush, Tony Blair and John Howard were determined to take us into an illegal occupation of Iraq. And at that point, it seemed to us that with enough determined opposition, we would be able to prevail, that common sense and sanity would prevail. And in that instance, they went in, they invaded that country, and the people of Iraq, Syria, the region more broadly, are still living with the consequences of that illegal invasion. And nobody who authorised that assault on Iraq went to jail. Nobody was prosecuted. The only people getting prosecuted are those who go onto the base to show their dissent. So all we know of this place is somewhere between 800 and 1,000 people on site. The facility is jointly run by the CIA, the US National Security Agency and the National Reconnaissance Office, the NRO. Here comes a little divvy van. Please be respectful and chilled out with the cops, and presuming that they will be do that with us as well. And as you can see on this sign, it is arguably jointly run by the Australian Department of Defence, the lead agency, the Australian Signals Directorate and others, and including our friends here from the Australian Federal Police. If you were to see it on the flight in, or if you have a look on Google Earth, we can't see it from here obviously, there's 14 domes. They're not there for show. They are basically to weatherproof the huge satellite dishes that are under there. And we are standing in front of effectively what is a gigantic listening post. It's a huge electronic ear that is vacuuming signals out of the sky from satellites, whether they're military or civilian or whatever they are. It is here to basically hoover down that material and then bounce it back to the United States or to wherever. And what that effectively implicates us in, whether we like it or not just on paper but in reality, is that it's tied to the global Echelon network, which is a quasi-military signals gathering network that is vacuuming down telephone calls, data transfer, basically everything within range, and sending that back to the military. So it's the effective militarization of civilian communications channels. It's not targeted, it's not discriminate, it's like a massive electronic vacuum cleaner just grabbing everything that's there. And one of the more important revelations of Edward Snowden in 2013 was that this place is named, and this place is implicated in that signals gathering. The second thing it's implicated in is the illegal drone assassination program run by the United States government. Because of its site in the Southern Hemisphere, it's very important for those targeting activities in the Middle East and Pakistan. I want you to imagine for a second, because I think many Australians don't give it much thought, but imagine for a second if other governments to do what the United States government chooses to do with its drone assassination program, and without any kind of declaration of war, without any recourse to international law, was to simply assassinate people using remote-controlled flying murder drones, and then claim that it was discriminate and that it was in fact lawful. Try and imagine how people would react if the Indonesian government started doing that to West Papuan terrorists, or if the Chinese government started taking out Tibetans, or if the Russian government started using these things, and one day your wedding party is just obliterated by some machine hovering a couple of hundred meters overhead. That is what is being done to people in Yemen, in Pakistan, in other parts of the Middle East every day by this drone assassination program. One source believes, because it was obviously maintained and expanded under President Obama, that drone assassinations have increased by 400% since President Trump took over. And the final thing that I want to mention about what goes on back here is that it is tied to nuclear weapons targeting. An Australian defence doctrine says we're under the US nuclear weapons umbrella. It endorses the plausible use of these weapons of genocide in defence of Australia, however you might want to visualise that. And that one day we might wake up, wonder why everybody's turned white and is glued to the television, and find that the Trump administration has launched a nuclear strike somewhere. It's in the southern or eastern hemisphere. This place is involved, and I didn't vote for that. In fact, there were no candidates in the Liberal or Labor parties that I could have voted for who would have stood up and said, that is wrong. What goes on in that place is wrong, and that's why it's important that we're here. But, if we're seeking to get out from under foreign policy and defence subservience to the United States, and if we're seeking on doing that in more than a symbolic sense, it's got to start with places like this. Pine Gap either needs to be opened up or it needs to be closed down. And I reckon I'll leave it there and turn over to Lee. Thank you so much. It's really wonderful to see you doing it.